Hi, I'm Stephanie Bass, and you're in mixed company. Hi, and welcome to Mixed Company. This is Stephanie Bass. You are turned into part 2 of our episode on the Charlottesville Rally in 2017 and its legacy. We started the first part, which is the first half, so if you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to that. You're going to need that for some background information. And here you go. Here's part 2, where we talk about the reactions and the legacy of the Charlottesville Rally.
You want to start, or do you want me to do this part?
Can you start with it, and then I will just interject smart aleck remarks.
So
because this is how I'm going to maintain a level of sort of self-care. Okay.
Self-care is important. So we're going to start with the elephant in the room.
It's not he's a big orange nightmare. He's not an elephant.
Well, I was making a joke.
It's more like an angry peach sea lion.
He's also a Republican.
I'm not saying Republicans are bad.
No.
This Trump as a guy is not a good person.
No.
And that's not saying Republicans are bad. I don't think Republicans are bad people. I'm from a red state. I know lots of Republicans.
Yeah.
This guy, though.
Yeah, this individual.
This guy.
So his reaction was to start with a statement that basically said that not everyone was a racist or a white supremacist who went to the Unite the Right rally. Some were just protesting the removal of a statue.
Ah!
So that was the first thing.
They're not racist. They just wanna maintain a racist heritage.
Yeah.
That's so wrong.
There's nothing wrong with that. There is, but anyway. Good people on both sides. So he then went into that. He's basically placing the blame for the violence and for the sort of the tragedies on both sides, because there was violence on both sides. And he started talking about a very violent alt-left.
Which isn't a thing.
Yeah.
The alt-left is not a movement. It's not a thing. Everything that the left side did was a reaction.
Yeah.
Ooh. Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay. He noted that, there's sort of this, he didn't use these words, but he made the case that there's a bit of a slippery slope for erasing Confederate history.
I would love to hear Trump say that. He'd be like, what does that mean?
Yeah. And he wouldn't call, one of the biggest things is that he wouldn't call the murder of Heather Heyer an act of terrorism. And this is something that, we've seen time and time again when, that word comes up. It's in relation to brown people. It's in relation to people who are not white, who are not, quote unquote, Christian, who are, it's a racialized term used for a specific type of violence.
And it shouldn't be.
No, it's because really what it is it's violence for a political purpose. Yeah.
And that car guy, I don't care what his name is, he was a terrorist.
Yeah. And then, he finished off by bragging about winning primaries or something. And the reason I put that in there is that's because that's how every one of his discussion ends. You'll see him go through it. He kind of meanders his way through his discussion or his points, and then he finishes by bragging about how great his win was.
Oh, man.
Which is really not the point.
Get in the now.
So that was his reaction. And of course, the news cycle was absolutely drenched in it for days. They were just, talking it up and doing their whole, analysis of the analysis of the analysis.
I just yelled into pillows that weekend. That's all I did.
And the reality is, this is something that's sort of frustrating, but the reality is that all people really needed to do if they disagreed with what he said was say, that was awful. And he's a horrible person.
I don't want to talk about what he could have said because he didn't.
And that's the end of it.
And I'm sure he had people telling him, can you just say this? And
well, did you see his chief of staff?
No. Did he look like I look right now? Was he shaking his head like
Yeah, he pretty much, he winced and then buried his face in his hands. So.
Just, dude, I don't even know.
But he still works for him, so.
I worked for him, I'm like, dude, what are you even talking about?
So what about the ACLU?
That was not even a good segue. Other responses that I have right now that we looked at was the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, executive director. Her name is Claire Gastanaglia. I don't know if I got that right. I'm sorry. And what she said was the situation in Charlottesville was preventable. And the ACLU actually sued an injunction because the rally was they sued the federal court granting an injunction allowing the rally to go forward. But they said that didn't cause it, because what was going to happen was the people who applied for the permit were not going to be able to get the permit. And the ACLU said, you can't do that. They're allowed to assemble and have free speech. And so they got a little bit of criticism because they're like, well, if you didn't do that, so they couldn't meet, this wouldn't happen.
Right.
And so then they said, well, no, that's not what happened. And so they sort of passed the buck and said it was the lack of physical separation between the protesters and counter-protesters by the police. It was the fact that the police didn't respond. It's that they were standing passively. And then they didn't declare the state of emergency and clear the area. And so they said that it wasn't our fault that this happened. This was the police's fault.
Yeah, and just to be clear, so the ACLU sued on behalf of the Unite the Right organizers to get permits because they weren't going to be granted permits to hold the rally.
Yes.
And the ACLU is, it's, what is it, the American
Civil Liberties Union. So it protects the Constitution, right? So they have a right they have a right to free speech and peaceful assembly, though. And so that's why I'm like, I'm not sure I agree with that sort of legal decision, but I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah.
And I don't play one on TV.
Yeah.
So I don't know how sort of that wheel works.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately you have to, in some senses, I like to defer to the court decisions unless they're manifestly wrong in some way. Yeah. And usually those involve an appeal and then an overturn or something like that. But I mean, in this case, basically the ACLU sued. They got their injunction saying these guys should be allowed to protest and they should be allowed to gather. What was not part of that bargain was these guys coming with their shields and their armor and their
guns
ready to rumble kind of thing. That wasn't part of it. It was supposed to be a peaceful process.
But I mean, if you watch the footage of them walking, marching in, Vice News has, and I think it's available online, but they won a Peabody Award for their journalism on the Charlottesville Rally. And if you watch the footage of these guys aggressively walking in with torches, shouting.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a peaceful, that's we're here to, we're going to play to win, guys.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was a very aggressive entrance. So, I mean.
Well, and anyone who works in, especially, so if we go back to sort of the police response and the leadership, right? Mm-hmm. So the police, the captain and the city's office, like the mayor and whatnot, they're going to know, based on their experience, what this is going to turn into pretty quick. And the fact that they didn't anticipate this
I don't
turning
like
violent.
The ACLU just passed the buck. They're like, no, we didn't do it. I'm like, hey, maybe you had a little part in it.
Yeah, because I mean, ultimately they could have left it for the organizers to sue on their own behalf, instead of representing them.
I know, you have a little bit of the blame here, and if you they acted in alignment with their mandate, right? But then with that comes a responsibility. So.
And not freedom of consequence.
Yeah. So I just think that, I'm not sure that response was, I don't know, I don't have a lot of sympathy, but I mean, on the other hand, they do a lot of great work, right? So I don't know. I know that the city of Charlottesville's response was to have an independent review by a law firm.
Yeah.
And it ended up being titled the Heafy Report, named after the lawyer who led. And the final report is available online. And I know that I linked on the blog an article that sort of goes through and details it.
Yeah, because reading the whole thing's a bit long.
Yeah, but there were a few points that I wanted to highlight. I wanted to highlight 3 points. And the Heafy report says that the law enforcement failed to break up fights or take an active role in preventing the fights. And so they They called it a tremendous tactical failure.
Well, and also they were instructed not to intervene.
Yeah. And so the problem was the police supervisors devised a poorly conceived plan, these are quote, that under-equipped and misaligned hundreds of officers. Execution of that plan elevated officer safety over public safety, which is not what you're supposed to do.
No, that's not a police mandate.
The second point is that the Charlottesville and state police, the Virginia State Police, failed to operate under a unified command. And they didn't even use the same radio channel, which means you had two competing police officers that are not communicating.
Yeah, police forces, like groups of, like massive groups of personnel.
It reminds me of that scene in Die Hard, right? When the feds come in, they're like, who's in charge here, right? Like,
yeah.
There was just no sort of communication on that. And that the University of Virginia officials, because there is a campus in Charlottesville,
Yeah.
The UV officials were aware of the plans for the torchlit rally by white nationalists, but took no action to enforce separation between groups or otherwise prevent violence. And I think what I interpret that to mean is that they did not put, because the first counter-protesters were a group of students from the school, and they did not do anything to, I guess, dissuade or discourage people from going there to counter-protest. And so I guess the Heafy report says, they didn't do their due diligence to protect the people either.
Well, it sounds to me like on all levels here, it was this kind of, from the ACLU on down through this report, it feels almost like everybody in an organizing position who could have organized some sort of let's make sure the protections are in place. We're like, oh no, it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think it was like a domino. They're like, it's not going to be that bad. And then it just started to grow and grow and grow.
Yeah.
And then at that point, you're like,
oops.
And then trying to mobilize a response to something so big when you didn't lay the groundwork becomes
impossible,
insurmountable, right? And I think that's what happened.
Yeah.
And so the Heafy report is not very favorable on the police or the university. An interesting reaction to me was David Duke's response. He didn't really respond to the Charlottesville Rally. So for people who don't know, David Duke was a Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, and he was very famous and outspoken, like, white supremacist through the 70s, 80s, and even till today.
Would you call him like the poster boy of the Klan?
No, because he's terrifyingly he's terrifying to look at. But is that a low blow?
It's hilarious. I like it.
I don't think he's the poster boy. I think he's like if you had.
He's like the PR guy?
No, he's just been in the game for so long.
Yeah.
That people are like, he's like, he's one of the originals. He's like the OG.
Yeah.
White supremacist in the United States, right? Like he was like one of the first Grand Wizards to go on TV and do interviews. And like just to be very public about who he was and what he did, right?
Yeah.
And he became very famous for being that. And so that's why his response is very interesting. And his response was not about Charlottesville. He said very little about the events during the rally. His response was about Donald Trump's comments.
Yeah.
And it's ridiculous, but he ends up tweeting, and I can't believe how much we talk about tweets these days, but he ends up tweeting, "Thank you, President Trump, for your honesty and courage to tell the truth about Charlottesville and condemn the leftist terrorists in the BLM Antifa."
Yeah.
David Duke is ready to call the counter-protesters terrorists, but not the people who instigated the whole situation.
Well, based on his worldview, I mean, that's what you would expect.
His worldview sucks.
But what allowed him to do that was the way Donald Trump legitimized the original protest and refused to totally just disavow its participants. So by placing the blame on both sides, he offered legitimacy to both sides. He offered both sides the ability to say, well, there's blame everywhere.
Well, and I think he's making both sides seem equal, right?
Yeah.
And they're not.
So I mean, because ultimately, it's just he's been a big supporter of Donald Trump. It's not really hard to see why, simply because when you listen to how Trump talks about race, he's not for the moving forward. He is for the going back.
Yeah. Which is too bad.
Yeah. Then there was Anonymous, which I know you said before we started here that you have a little soft spot for them.
I do.
And it's interesting. But what they did, their reaction was essentially to hack neo-Nazi websites, to dox higher-ups in the organizations. And actually what happened as well is there was a Twitter campaign where people were posting pictures of the rally and asking for identification of the people who were participating. And
Anonymous was really a big part in getting that information about those people.
Yeah. So I mean, there was definitely there was a concerted effort to go after the people who were there and who were promoting the white supremacists, and who were part of the alt-right and all the rest of it. Because ultimately, and we've talked about this, on numerous occasions about you're free to think and believe what you want. You're free to say what you want, but you're not necessarily free from the consequences of those beliefs and actions.
Yeah. And I think I have to explain my soft spot for Anonymous, okay?
Well, yeah.
Because I'm not hacking, let's do it. I think that my soft spot for Anonymous is that it's a group of people that have a particular set of skills with computers, and they are angry and frustrated about what's happening politically, and their way of contributing is to use their computer skills to try and bring about some change. And so some things they do are a crime.
Yeah.
However, sometimes when you're protesting laws and systems that are in place, that is also a crime. So I see it as a way of sort of another type of protest.
Well, and the other thing, too, is not all laws are just.
Yeah. And so that's my soft spot for Anonymous, is that they're like, computers make the world go round, so this is how we're going to get them.
Yeah.
And so that's my soft spot for Anonymous. I don't like sometimes the result of when that information is made public, because I do think people have a right to their privacy.
Well, and they get it wrong sometimes, too.
Yeah.
That's the other thing.
So, I mean, that is my soft spot for Anonymous. They're trying to do good things, and they're not doing it in the best way sometimes. Yeah. Which is kind of like me. So, that's my soft spot for Anonymous. The UN, there was a UN committee that had a response saying that there was a failure at the highest political level of the United States of America, that's Trump, to unequivocally reject and condemn racist violence. So they basically just said, Trump, what are you doing?
Yeah. And I mean, if you've seen the way the Trump administration has sort of reacted to the UN, and I mean, they've left the UN Council of Human Rights and whatnot. Clearly, they're not the biggest fan of the UN or the UN's message or the UN's methodology. And so, I mean, it's not...
I'm sure he didn't lose sleep over what the UN said, but I just thought that it was an interesting thing to say, right? Like, the UN's like, that's not cool.
Yeah. So. And then also, like, just to kind of close off the idea of, like, the consequences from earlier a little bit, I forgot to say this, that the, when people were identified, either on Twitter or by Anonymous or whomever, some of them, were expelled from schools, they were fired from their jobs, they were discharged from the military, because, as much as they want to have their beliefs, as much as they want to be outspoken in those beliefs, and, that's a protected right. It's not a protected right is acting on those things and causing problems and sort of manifesting that hate openly.
I know, and I am torn on that as well. I think that's another discussion for another day, is sort of results of like public shaming, right, of people. And it, on the one hand, I'm like, well, they obviously don't feel ashamed themselves, so we should maybe teach them. But on the other hand, I don't think anybody's life should be ruined because they made a stupid choice.
Well, I mean, the thing is that if someone, like, let's go forward, let's pretend 10 years in the future, someone attended the rally. They've been outed publicly at the rally. They've lost their job. They've been expelled from school. They can't get a new job because their name is forever tainted. Mm-hmm. How likely is it that person is going to learn their lesson versus double down because the only group that accepts them is the one they were a part of that day?
Well, I think that they would double down, right? And run to the community that...
Yeah.
Anyways, so we'll have to talk about that another time because I have some concerns.
Thoughts and concerns. And then, of course, do you want to sort of talk a little bit about our immediate reactions?
Well, why don't you go first, because mine are hard to put into words.
Yeah, as are mine. I mean, I think the way I felt when I was, because I was kind of glued to the, to the news feeds as well, and I was mad and frustrated. That the situation got so out of control to begin with, and that these things were permitted to happen. But in addition, I was horrified and disgusted as well because, these actions have consequences. People get hurt. A person died. A person got killed. People were injured. There was a lot of, violence. There's a lot of injuries that happened. And as a result of those things, people have to deal with criminal charges. They have to deal with medical situations. They have to deal with potentially life-altering injuries. There's all sorts of things that you have to deal with as a result, and that could have been prevented. Mm. And I will never agree with the sort of alt-right viewpoint, the racist viewpoint. Any movement that goes on hate, that runs on hate or fear of others or othering others, that's going to, that's going to be on my in my bad books. I just got really upset that it was so poorly handled. Mm.
I think that my reaction was I was afraid for the people that were there, and I was angry that so many people were part of this alt-right nonsense and were patrolled there, or not patrolled, but they were protesting there. I was exhausted after watching and listening to things that were happening, and I think I was just ultimately very sad. Sad because of the tragedies that happened, that we heard about. I was sure that there were more things that were happening that we didn't hear about. And I'm still really sad and disappointed that an event like that could turn out the way that it did. And so still not sure about how I feel. I mean, I don't feel great about it, but it's still hard to sort of sort out my feelings. And I know this episode is not about a trip down memory lane about this.
Yeah.
This rally. There was a reason why I wanted to outline the events from last year and talk about it now, because it's in the news again. Yeah.
Because there's another rally scheduled for this weekend.
It's happening right now in Washington, D.C. And it's pretty amazing that they want to sort of take another stab at it.
Yeah. So I mean, this year's Unite the Right 2 sort of reflects the demise of the extreme right. Because since Charlottesville, the so-called alt-right activists have organized or attended 32 public events in the United States, according to Carla Hill of Anti-Extremism Watchdog Anti-Defamation League, acronym ADL, and the clear majority of the events were
they're flash mobs.
Yeah, where 5 to 20 people briefly appear, unfold a banner, protest immigration, which is one of their signature strategies of alt-right groups. And then
this year they're including what they call the alt-light. And the alt-light are people who were turned off by Charlottesville last year and do not see themselves on the same sort of level as the people that were part of that. And so there's this splinter group of alt-right called the alt-light. And they are...
alt-white?
No, they're still white. They're just alt-right light.
Oh, sorry.
Right?
When you said alt-light, I heard alt-white.
No, alt-light. They're the alt-right light.
There we go.
And so they don't see themselves as these angry, militant white supremacists. They see themselves as just misunderstood conservatives. And so this rally was to try to appeal to them because they were so turned off. Like, regular conservatives, regular Republican and conservatives people were turned off by the actions of the white supremacists and alt-right during that rally. Regular conservatives don't want to go and hit people they disagree with a car. And so that was sort of the focus on this rally.
Right.
And the police and the state police this year weren't messing around. Before the weekend, they declared it a state of emergency. Businesses are closed because in a state of emergency, there's a whole host of things that you have to go through. And yeah, because they are worried that an event like this is going to turn out the way it did last year. And I haven't really looked at the news, so I don't know what it looks like. So I'll be interested to do that after we finish recording this.
And so some of the alt-light groups are things like Patriot Prayer or the Proud Boys. And I mean...
Do you know the Proud Boys are named after a song from Aladdin the Musical?
I think that's hilarious.
I don't even... When I was reading it, my head just couldn't even get around. You're named after a Disney song? Well, I mean, that part makes sense. But, anyways. Yeah, so I thought it was a tidbit that you might want to know.
And, I mean, ultimately, here's how I see them. And maybe I'm incorrect, maybe not. But I see them as a group of people with racist views who aren't willing to get hurt in the pursuit of their views.
I think that the difference is that they're more motivated by fear and not hate.
Okay.
Right? Like fear and not understanding versus hate.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's a big difference because I can deal with people that are afraid. Fear is usually, you can counter fear with education.
Yeah.
Right? And compassion. Hate is hard. Right? Because you got to be in to love somebody who hates you for the long haul, and who might hurt you, and the volatility of hate. And so the people who are conservative that are afraid, I would much rather talk to them, and I would much rather hear them out. And so I think that's a very different sort of approach.
Yeah.
To talking to people. One story that I liked was that Metro, who is the subway train service in Washington, D.C., was going to have special train cars for people that wanted to go to this Unite the Right rally. And then the union of the drivers and conductors and whoever, I don't know what they're called on the subway, they said, no, we're not doing that. And so they had to cancel that service. Yeah.
So, I mean, the idea was, well, if these people are potentially going to, increase the chances of something bad happening.
No, that's not it at all.
No.
They were like, we don't support white supremacists.
Oh no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying the idea to have those three cars, those three sort of like things.
Yeah, the union was like, no.
Yeah, the union didn't want it.
I'm not driving those guys.
Yeah.
And so the Metro couldn't do it because there's
no driver.
The union told you're not driving for them.
Yeah.
So they had to cancel it, right?
Yeah. So, and in addition to that, I mean, like I was reading that there are certain businesses. I'm not sure if, like, I know that I can't remember if it was Uber or Lyft or both of them.
I think it's both.
And then Airbnb as well. And I know that there are other businesses as well saying that participants in this rally, so anyone who attends as a participant for the Unite the Right to, may be banned from their services.
I think it's funny because I'm like, you're going to have a hard time getting there, everyone.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the...
Guess you're carpooling.
That's part of the, I think, strategy in disrupting it is saying, well, if they can't get here, then there can't be a big rally, and so we cut them off at the knees before it starts.
Maybe. I don't know. I think it's good that some businesses are like, no, we're not doing that.
Well, I agree. I think that businesses should be more involved in. So, for example, if their services are used to promote, like especially social media and stuff like that, if their services are being used to promote hate or promote these sort of divisive, topics, you kind of have a responsibility as the owner to come down and say either, yeah, I support it, or no, I don't. And if you support it, then
corporations aren't people though. So, I mean,
they're treated like people.
I know they are, which is my problem. So, I don't know. I admire that certain businesses are like, no, I don't want any part of this. I don't want any part of your white supremacist politics. And so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You have a comment on militias. Can you tell me about that? I don't know what that means.
Oh, yeah. So this isn't actually in D.C., but this is in Charlottesville. So this was sort of like this was something that came out of all the reports and whatnot, is the city of Charlottesville actually sued 3 militias who showed up. And those militias have agreed to be banned forever from attending Charlottesville in an organized manner. They can come individually without weapons as visitors, but if they show up, like, they're not permitted to show up.
They can't go for a group trip in town to Charlottesville, eh?
Yeah, exactly. And they can't show up with weapons and other things.
So they can't assemble there.
Yeah, and they've agreed to that. They basically said, okay, you know what? And so that was 2 chapters of the Lightfoot militia, and one of, they're called the 3%.
Don't know who they are either.
Me neither. But
I'm glad.
Yeah, they're basically just people who like to shoot guns in the woods. And
all right. Well, that's not necessarily bad, but...
And then take those guns to cities and... Okay,
that's the bad part.
There you go.
And threaten all sorts of people with them. That's not a good part. You want to... we're going to have to talk about Trump again. Yeah. So I'm going to throw that to you, because he makes me too mad, and I start stuttering and screaming.
Yeah.
So you go.
So I think recently Trump came out with another statement talking about how he condemns...
Don't you just want him to shut up?
Yeah. He condemns, quote, all types, unquote, of racism. And
if you listen to our episode on definition, there is one type of racism.
Yeah. He's doing the coded language thing. He's gaslighting or dog whistling. And he's basically...
I think it's both.
Yeah. He's basically manipulating your view to legitimize his supporters. And so...
The other definition of gaslighting, because that's what you're talking about, is manipulating somebody into questioning their own sanity or their own beliefs, right?
Yeah.
And so by saying they're condemning all types, quote unquote, of racism, it really emphasizes that whole idea that, white racism, which doesn't happen in the United States. We talk about that in definitions. Like, I agree that it could happen in places where white people are the numeric minority.
Yeah.
But that's not the case in North America. And so that is not a point. It's moot. It's not real.
Well, I mean, it kind of leads from there. So when you talk about, so when he says something like that, what he's doing is he's linking a whole chain of things. So when he says something like all types of racism, he's saying all lives matter. He's saying,
yeah, and we will have an episode on dog whistling. So
yeah, so he's connecting things that lead down the line towards the alt-right.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
that supports them, right?
Yeah, exactly. It gives them legitimacy. It gives them a spot at the table.
I wish Twitter would say, "You are not a verified user anymore, Mr. Trump," and get rid of him. Find a new platform.
He's already creating his own, actually.
Okay, I don't even want to think about that.
I found out about that today.
So, I think we should move on.
Yep.
The Charlottesville has the rally has a legacy.
Mm-hmm.
It was a historical event that had occurred in our lifetime.
Yeah.
And it had significant impact on a few things. We talk a little bit about the monuments and who we create monuments for and which monuments should stick around and which shouldn't, which is a really good thing. One legacy is that Charlottesville is more like a synonym of a white supremacy movement, right? Like you could say, oh, what happened at Charlottesville? And it just conjures an image. And so CBC has a great article that's linked on the blog, and he says, and quote, Charlottesville's no longer just the name of a city. The word Charlottesville has been fused into the American psyche as an event where forces of racial bigotry felt emboldened to march in the streets of a sleepy southern town, evoking painful memories of the country's racist past. And it's true, because you could say, what happened in Charlottesville, or you can just say Charlottesville, and people know you're talking about this event, this town that you might not have ever heard of before. Another legacy that this talks about is this legacy of fear, that there was a professor that was hiding students because there was so much physical violence. Like, he was hiding them in the basement of the building that had his office.
Yeah.
And I would go further and say the fear of walking in the street when there's an assembly going on, the fear of counter-protesting or protesting in general. I know that I often think twice if they're like, oh, there's a rally, and I was like, oh, I will watch it on the news, because I get anxious about participating in things like that. Which is my right to do so, right? And so I think that fear is very much a legacy. And the last legacy that the CBC article talks about is the deplatforming of racist sites and fundraising, which I think is a really important point. Now some of these neo-Nazi sites are having a hard time finding somebody to host their websites, and PayPal has blocked them out. So now fundraising, which was done predominantly online, is very difficult.
Yeah.
Because they can't use any of the services that are in place, like PayPal or whatever, and they have to use Bitcoin and other sort of dark web resources to get that money. Yeah. Which involves a certain amount of know-how, because I have no idea how to do anything with Bitcoin. And I'm sure people that want to support white supremacists don't know how to do that either. Yeah. And so it's a real defunding of these groups that were there. Yeah. And so I see that as a positive legacy, as opposed to the other two, where now people who live in Charlottesville, if somebody says, oh, I'm from Charlottesville, you're like, well, yeah,
Well, the other thing too is that during that, I mean, there was a little bit of coverage. I didn't see a lot of it, but there was a little bit of coverage of people who lived in Charlottesville, and they're basically like, they're either out of town for the weekend or they're in their houses and they're not going outside, and that's their own city, that's their own space, and suddenly that's been taken away from them, and now has a totally negative connotation. Yeah. So I mean, that's also something that they have to deal with, because now it's like, great, there's a stain on on us.
Yeah. Charlottesville now has a black woman mayor.
So that's good.
So that is another sort of legacy from it. Her name is Nakia Walker, and she is the first black woman elected mayor in that town.
Yeah. And that's nice because you wrote down a quote. Was that from her or was that from somebody else?
No, that's from a Slate article.
Okay.
Where the author, I forget his name, he writes, "The true legacy of the Unite the Right rally will be the unity forged by those on the other side." So you do see a sort of an alignment of people putting sort of their foot
down.
Yeah, saying, well, no, I'm not supporting that. So you have online businesses that are deplatforming people and communities that are electing more diverse politicians.
Do you think that there needs to be an event kind of like this in order for people to say, whoa, no, I'm not okay with this? Like, or is it because ultimately if it's simmering under the surface like it was during Obama, like his presidency during the 8 years that he was in power, people were, unhappy. And there was like the whole birther thing and all that. But do you think it took something like Charlottesville to really draw the focus of everyone who says, this is not okay? We're going to stop this from happening again.
I hope not, because then it's going to take catastrophic or tragic events to get any change. And I don't think that is how we shouldn't be reactionary. Yeah. To what's happening, and this is a very reactionary legacy, right? But yeah, I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah. In addition, so there's been some bankruptcy and jail time for some of the Nazis who were involved.
And I think the biggest thing that you can see in the United States is sort of the blue wave
coming, like the idea that
all these different diverse people who are applying to running for Congress and Senate and stuff, and I think that's really, really great. To be less descriptive, I think it's really great.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to wait and see what the election actually does, because unfortunately with gerrymandering and stuff like that, the table can be tilted a little bit.
You don't know what it's going to look like. But it's cool to see more young people that are willing to sort of put their neck out and get into politics, right? Whereas before it was an older person game.
And they're not playing it as safe. They're willing to say things that would put them further left than sort of the older Democrats were, and so they're more willing to go out and say, nah, this isn't okay. We're not putting up with this. This is garbage. And then that's also sort of a movement for change.
And one legacy is that the alt-right likes to play Charlottesville 2017 as like a big victory. Like, oh, we united our people and we tried to take back our country, or whatever nonsense they say. But the goals for that original rally were to show the United States that the alt-right is not a social media phenomenon, which is what it was described as. Especially in the news circles with Milo Yiannopoulos and the idea of Breitbart News, that this is a very online community that won't take any action, and that the alt-right is able to bring various groups together.
The other
and then people could argue that they didn't do either of those. In fact, they splintered it, because now you have the alt-light, or the alt-right light group that's like, no, I'm not them. I'm not one of them.
I don't necessarily, like, so for example, the alt-right is like, well, we don't like immigrants. We don't like immigration.
Build the wall.
Build the wall, but we're not racists. And we're not willing to...
But my neighbor's black, and I had a friend when I was 10 who was black, right? Like these... Like
suburban...
Like I said, I think they're very motivated by fear. So, and so the idea that the two big goals for the first rally weren't successful with that. They are stronger online than they are in real life. And
One thing,
and they splintered. What?
yeah. Oh, sorry. I just
Stop
like
trying to cut me off. What do you want?
Sorry, I just wanted to say one of the best parts about any of this was that Richard Spencer keeps getting punched in the face.
Oh yeah.
Every time he shows up somewhere.
Every time I see those videos, I'm like, man, that sucks. But it's so funny.
Yeah, we're not condoning violence.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
I mean,
it's
I
funny.
could watch the video of Richard Spencer getting punched in his hate hole over and over. I just, and he's like, it's gonna keep happening, but he still goes out and he's still like, let's talk to reporters, and you're like, oh man. So, don't punch people in the mouth.
yeah, engage.
Yeah, just don't punch people in the mouth.
Yeah.
No matter how funny it is on YouTube.
Yeah, don't punch Richard Spencer in the face and post the video to YouTube. That's what we're saying. Don't do that.
I don't know what we're saying. That video is hilarious. It's funny. But I don't know.
It's hard to unwrap that one.
Yeah. Well, I think that we should just tie this one off because it was a lot to take in. This is a very long episode. This is like a double episode. I might cut it into 2.
Whatever you want to do.
Just because the podcast is over doesn't mean that the conversation stops. We would love to hear your comments, reflections, and questions. So you could visit our blog at imcpodcast.blogspot.com, or you can tweet to us at imcpodcast. If you're a Facebook user, we have a page there too. It's facebook.com/imcpodcast. New episodes upload every Sunday. Our theme music is the song Righteous Fight by Angara. Thanks for listening, and see you later.